Well, welcome to our third installment of Floats and Finances. Really glad that you're here. I think I'm really excited to get to share with you some of the things that have been going on around here. Let me open us up in a word of prayer, and we'll share some cool stuff. Let's pray. Jesus, I just want to address that in my own heart, and I think in this space, it can feel like a really hard gear shift to go from talking about the Last Supper and to talking about being saved and welcomed into your family as your children again, and then talking about finances of a local church. And I just want to address that all of these conversations are centered on the same thing, that everything that happens in this place we do to our very best to reflect who you are to the world around us. So, in the ways that we do get to be a financial institution as well as an institution of preaching and singing and serving, we offer this as worship to you. We want to do a good job. We want to steward things well, ultimately so that we can bring the kingdom in ways that reflect it with the absolute best clarity. Thanks to these folks who, whether they're here or whether they're watching online or will watch later, for their heart to invest in this place, not just in the finances, but to help make sure those finances are being stewarded with excellence, and for their desire to continue to participate in what this church has been about. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Cool. Well, welcome, y'all. We have some really cool things to get to share with you. Just as a quick review, if we were to go back to June, that was the last Floats and Finances that we did. We talked about a couple things there. We had an update on our runway campaign that we had. That has finished just a touch north of $280,000, which is fantastic. The goal was $270,000, so that's absolutely massive. As a reminder, that was being done to free up a couple things. The first was we knew that we needed to hire a youth pastor, and we knew we needed to start making movement on hiring a full-time worship arts pastor. Hopefully you've met him at this point, but Daniel Maxim, is Daniel in here? Okay, great. I'm going to brag on Daniel. When we had Daniel's interview, the interview team kind of turned around and was like, this guy's amazing. Jake, I think it was week 3 of Daniel being in the role, we were talking about him, and he said, we thought he was really good. And I don't know, if you've ever hired anybody, there's always that risk of do you see the real deal in the interview? And Jake leans in and he goes, he's so much better than he was in the interview. We have an excellent youth pastor, you guys. I am so pumped by how God provided and who he provided. So Daniel's in. We do have an interview team that's already begun. We've received, I think, we're well over 10 now applicants for our worship arts position, but that position is open. You've probably heard about that a couple different times in announcements on Sunday mornings, but I think there is a deep appreciation for maybe that person will just find us, but in the process of looking for somebody, if we go find that person, maybe our chances are better of finding a really excellent person. So if you know somebody, just know that we're looking right now, and our hope is, we'll keep the foot on the gas with that hire until we have that person. Another piece of that runway campaign was if we could hit a certain dollar amount that we could build the cafe, which has been a part of our master plan as we're moving ahead. We have hit that dollar amount. We're in the final stages of finalizing our construction loan with the Solomon Foundation, which is who our mortgage is through. And then we'll be breaking ground on that project, which is really, really exciting just for the relational space that will create, particularly when it gets cold outside, that we'll still be able to hang out after in between services and all that kind of stuff. So we'll have some Q&A once we get to the end. If there's anything further that you want to know more about, hold those questions until the end. But we've got some stuff that's new since then. So to get us kicked off, I'm going to kick it over to John to talk about some of our royalties.
Okay, thank you. I'm John Neal. I'm the treasurer of the Elder Board. I'm going to talk about these in reverse order. The first one that's on your screen says mineral rights. I'll come back to that. The second one it says cell tower. About 5 years ago, we signed a contract with Verizon to allow them to put a cell tower on our property. They're going to build a silo-type structure and put a cell tower in, and they pay us a monthly fee for that. We'd signed it 5 years ago. We hadn't seen any money in 5 years, and of course, there's no cell tower out there. But in order to keep their lease, almost precisely at the time the runway project started, Verizon joined and they started sending us their monthly payment of $2,350 a month, which we will get in perpetuity or until they tear the silo down, one or the other. That's first thing. But you have seen, and I have seen in my life, many amazing things that God has done. And what blows me away mostly is this amazing timing, because it's simultaneously with the start of the runway campaign and with you stepping up and saying, yes, we're going to support this project. We believe that this is the right way to go. God's timing kicked in with mineral rights. The church has owned the mineral rights under this 18 acres since they bought the 18 acres. And over the years, we've had little dribbles of mineral money come in sporadically, sometimes a few hundred. A couple of times a year, we might get a little over 1,000, but it was never much. In June, we began to get checks for the first time, regular checks in excess of $20,000 a month that God joined in the runway campaign with and said, okay, it's time for the mineral rights money to start coming in. So I love to be up here and tell you good news about finances, and that's as good a news as you could possibly come up with. Let's talk about what the elders decided to do with that money. The first thing we decided was that the first 10% of whatever we get each month goes to tithe to our partners. And that's just the way our church operates. We tithe the money you donate, and we're going to tithe this money off the top. Because we didn't set a specific amount, we set percentages because we don't know how much this money will be every month. It depends on the price of oil, depends on how much production, oil and gas, and it depends on the production of the wells. Okay, so we said 10% will go to our tithe to our partners. 50% is going to go to replenishing our cash reserves, which got down to, if we had a fuel tank, the light would have come on back in February. We want to replenish those so that light doesn't ever come on again. That's not a fun feeling to have your empty light come on. Fill me up quickly. So half the money will go to that until that reserve is rebuilt. And then the other 40%, the balance, will go to staff, operations, however they want to use it towards projects which they had eliminated from the budget because of our lower income. So that's amazing news on all those fronts. The only other thing I would report on before questions and answers is that we had back in, in earlier this year, a task force was put together to review our internal financial controls. Task force that includes people who have background in auditing and in management. Not that we had a problem, it was simply to make sure we could say to all of you that we are on top of knowing that our financial controls are in good shape. That's an ongoing process, but so far everything is looking absolutely perfect, and we're very pleased with the internal controls and the accountability for the money that we receive, both from you and this newfound money that God has sent us. That's the end of mine. Jimmy.
Great.
Is this available? Are the slides available somewhere?
Yes, so this whole thing's being filmed, so it'll all be up then afterwards. Yeah, you bet. Thanks for asking.
Awesome. So my turn, I'm supposed to talk about Reach Reports, which Reach is just a company that we use to take some of our QuickBooks data and put it into some forms that we can use and give access to all of you. So we've created a particular Reach Report I want to draw your attention to, which I'm going to do.
Yep.
Okay.
And you can right now pull out your phone, click into the QR code that's on the back of your seat. there will be an option, one of the buttons there will say financial reporting or something like that. Click on that. It may take a minute for it to load, so don't worry if it doesn't like pop up right away, but I would love for you to pull out your phone and do this right now so that you can see it. This will be something that will be on the back of your chair for a long time to come. So,
yes.
cool.
So you can all see what I'm seeing on the screen. I shouldn't have done it so quickly. For those that weren't ready, they're like, oh, but it's up there.
That's true.
Do it on your phone. All right. So what this is it's actually pulling data live, which is great and also bad. Generally with financial stuff, that takes a time. You have to take it through a bookkeeper and make sure everything's right, and then it gets put into the system, and you usually don't get reports until about a month. Well, the month closes, and then the earliest you're looking is a week or two after the month closes. And so what we're looking at is way before that, which is super cool. We're in the what century are we in? We're in the modern century. Whereas we should be able to use this kind of stuff, but the reason why I give you that caveat is that when you're looking at this and you might look at some of the numbers, you might be concerned that like if you get to the end of the month, it's not showing some of the data that hasn't hit the system yet. So I just we're trusting that all of you can receive that and say, we're not going to take this as the absolute until we give it enough time for those numbers to catch up. I don't know if that makes sense, but the point of the story is that we had some people in the congregation that reached out to us and said, hey, if we knew that we were getting close to the end of the month and things were short, we would give more money. And so this is a tool that we wanted to put out in front of the people so we could get a little bit more of a heads-up idea versus looking in the rear view all the time. This gives us a little bit of a window into the now, with the danger and caveats of looking into the now with things like bookkeeping. But one of the things that I wanted to draw your attention to is just the way this is laid up, is that every month when you look at this, it'll show last month, and then it'll show the current month. And so this number at the bottom is what we've based our budget on every month. And so you can see that this number is shorter than that number. And then as we look at the current month, it's showing how much has come in so far. But we're not showing in these top totals the runway amounts, because if you remember when we talked about runway, we collected that money in order to help us bridge some of this gap that we saw that was happening. We also have the ability to take some of the oil and gas money that's put in the staff section to be able to do that same thing with. And so if you look at these numbers and you're a mathematical person, you're like, whoa, what is going on? These numbers don't add up. We are doomed. That's not the case. We obviously want the blue line to reach the green line. But this is all part of the plan of providing a runway to give us time so that people can come and give. And we want that blue line to reach the green line. But we have some money in reserves to make sure that we can bridge that gap for a little while. So if you look at this gives you some tracking with the runway money. This doesn't show the number that Zach shared because of, again, some of those things that aren't in the system correctly. But it'll track how much we've actually received over what was pledged, because some people pledged money and that just money hasn't come in yet. So you can take a look at that. And then this last one I put on there just to help those that are very numbers focused to look at the top and say, well, that math doesn't work. How bad is the church financially? And you can look down at the bottom and look at over the entire year, the amount of money total that we brought in versus the money that we've spent, to show that we're bringing in more than we're spending and manage our money wisely in that way. So if you have questions as you see these on a regular basis, versus freaking out first, you can send an email to donors@dc2.me and pose your questions there, and we can get back to you about that. So did I cover everything?
I think so.
All right.
Yeah, we'll get
Great.
questions in a minute. I think the only other thing, too, if you're the type of person that's going to be like, I just found a new Sunday habit. I'm going to come in, I'm going to click that in, I'm going to scroll through, I'm just going to see how we're doing. I think anecdotally, receiving not just from Steve and from Tom, but also talking with other friends who are in churches all over town and then further out, is they would all say, church isn't like a business where you're going to see like this steady month to month, like we're always pretty close every single month. You're going to see this roller coaster ride that happens. And some months we'll get a huge one-time gift, and that'll just send us into the stratosphere. And then we wean off of that for a while. We'll have a couple months where we go down, and boom, it comes back up again. So I think we wanted to honor the voices that said, we would really love to have this information in our hands. We just want to like be in front and join you guys in understanding where the church is at financially. So we want to honor that. I think making sure that you understand too, like there is some risk in putting information that we don't get to curate in the same amount of short time, like it's live, that you're getting to see it. And so any questions that you have, our hope is that those end up coming back in the form of a question rather than you making assumptions and filling those in. So know that we're inviting that conversation, not like, here's the information, do with it what you will. So, y'all, if you've been around Discovery for a while, you know that we've been talking about Habitat for Humanity for a long time. Nancy and Renee and I got to have a great meeting with some of the key players at that table this week. That conversation's continued. For the last couple months, we've been working with a real estate attorney as we're developing our lease agreement. And so this is now like signifies to anybody in real estate world, like, oh, we're getting down to the line where we're ready to rock and roll. One of the hangups that we've had that you can be praying for is we are donating the land. Habitat needs the capital to be able to build the actual things. And they've had about half of that for a while, but have been hemming and hawing a little bit of like, where are we going to get the rest of this money? So as we've been working on the project, for us, that's been one of the things that we've been thinking, this is going to continue to delay this project a little bit longer. This isn't finished, and it's not for sure. It looks incredibly promising that this week some of the financial streams that we'll need to get the first triplex built are coming together. And so be praying that that project comes to completion. The other cool thing about how this will work, if this is the route that we end up going, is some of the heart behind Habitat to begin with was we used to partner with a group called Growing Home. We still do work with them and with around that, the heartbeat. But the idea at the time was folks who are experiencing homelessness can come here, they can stay in our building for the week. This is their home. And that with this project with Habitat, one of the things we could do is some of those units could be rental units. So we could have folks who are staying here temporarily that we get into a rental situation. And over time, as they're building up reserves and growing in cash management and jobs and all the things that we can help with and the city can help with, that they get to a place of home ownership where they can do right here on the property. And that the time that they get to own their property with Habitat for Humanity on Discovery's campus then allows them to buy a home in the community. So we kind of get this start to finish. We're helping people into the world of home ownership. This first triplex that would be built, if this is the way that it's done, the whole triplex would be all rental units, and then the rest would all be owned by the homeowner through Habitat. So it's a really elegant, I think as we're watching all of the things come together, it is so beautiful to think like not only is that the heart behind it, and that's a cool heart, but the way that all of these things are coming together is like being told a story. It's so cool. So note too, for the units that will be sold and then owned, those are deed restricted titles. And so somebody can't move in and get one of these Habitat triplex homes on the cheap and then sell it at market value. Those homes, through how all the things are worked out through the lease agreement, will always be held for low-income housing, which is super, super cool. We are also developing in that lease agreement an HOA, so that will be like operated independently from the church. And so if somebody forgets to mow the grass, that won't be on Corbin to head over there and mow the grass. We'll have different ways to be able to do that, which is awesome. We do expect and hope, and I know if you've been around, you're like, here we go again, January, but we are thinking this spring, with the way things are lining up, that it's looking realistic that that will be a timeline we can start banking on. So please, please be praying for that. Okay. To shift gears a little bit, I think with all of these things that you're hearing, there could be a sense of like, okay, we're in good shape, until you saw some of Jimmy's reach reports, and they're like, oh, those bars are not next to each other. When we look at our giving, just at the giving, take our income and then take away royalties, take away any of the other factors that pour into how we run the church. These are the numbers that we're looking at every single week. So you can see down at the bottom, our budgeted goal, if we're fully sustainable, is about $34,600. We're pretty well underneath that at this point, which again, this is not a surprise. This was something as we were setting up the Runway campaign in its conception. This is exactly what we were looking at, going, we have gaps that we need to fill, and if we don't, we have to make huge decisions right now. Because Runway was successful, we should still look at these numbers with concern, but also knowing we have bought ourselves time to be able to see these things shift. So as you're looking at these numbers, just know, once royalties get factored in, like there are some other things that really start to point us towards health. But I do want you to see too, just when we look at giving and what is sustainable for our church, we're still under where we want to be. So Runway was built to be an 18-month ahead type deal. So we've got about another year right now before we'll need to start making some of those decisions. Some of that also is tied to our attendance, how many folks are here. And obviously through COVID, there's been a lot of shifts in how many folks are not just called Discovery home, but are here in the building on Sundays. So just as a cursory thing, but I think because it's tied to some of the finance, it's also tied to like who's participating, who's a part of this thing. These are the numbers on a typical Sunday for us right now. So you can see like 600 people, maybe you just count 375. I don't know how you want to round that out, but that's what we're seeing every single week for who's kind of consistently here. So what all of that means then is as we get into this coming spring of 2023, we've got our eyes on all of these things. And if we're not seeing movement in these in the financial giving, in the sustainability of our budget, that's going to be our time frame to be thinking through, are we trending that direction, or is this it for right now? And if this is it, we want to start adjusting our budget to become smaller to better reflect this is the reality of where we are right now, and that is okay. But that was in the Runway campaign, the idea that drove that was we need time to become sustainable. So we have till next spring to figure out what does sustainable mean? What's the number that we're looking at there? So there's some things I would ask you to be praying for as you're hearing all of this. The first, be praying for our elders, be praying for our staff, and you can be praying for me. We're continuing to think through what is the vision? Like what's the special project that God's put in front of us right now in this time for our local church? Just continue to pray for that. And if you have thoughts or things that you're super passionate about, don't keep those things to yourself. In that, you can absolutely pray that we continue to be a place that reaches out to the outcast and the doubting and the hurting. One other thing, because this is more of a financial update, there's a new credit through the IRS that's attached to the PPP loan that we received the last couple of years that is showing some promise that we could apply for this and actually get a pretty sizable gift back from the government. And so I won't share too much more about that right now. That's all in its earliest stages. We are just sending in our application for that. But you can be praying that that comes through. And if that comes through, that would be really, really cool. And finally, I think the more we continue to chat with and learn from both local and global partners, I think and even just looking at volunteerism here at Discovery, just continue to see this is a hard time to be doing ministry. It's a hard time to find volunteers. It's a hard time to find money. We have some of our local partners are having huge fundraisers this week. And I think hearing from many of them, like, we're concerned. We've got huge gaps that we need to cover, and we don't know if we're going to be able to get there. Be praying for these missionaries, whether they're home or abroad, that they have all the gas in their tank they need to do the work that God's called them to do right now. So that's all of the stuff that we wanted to share with you. I'm sure there are questions. No, it's always a little goofy to go first, and I need you to hold me accountable that we repeat the question that they ask. I'm terrible at this. Okay, great. Any questions? And then obviously, too, if you're like, this is not a whole room question, I want to pull somebody aside afterwards, we can do that too. But any things you want to cover while we're all together? Yeah, Sarah. Great. So the cell tower, it's not built, but it's going to be, maybe. What's the story with that? Do you want to answer that question?
Okay, the cell tower is supposed to be built, actually Tom could probably answer it better, but I asked him before this meeting. It's supposed to be built in a silo-type structure across the driveway area. No?
Just right here, right? Just out past the dumpsters. Yeah. Yeah, just right there, right outside this door, just on the other side.
Oh, right outside the door, not across the way. Okay, a silo as if it were a part of the farm, the barn, like you see on a farm. Okay, sorry, misunderstood that. It would be a silo structure built right out here. It's their responsibility to build it and maintain it and pay us a lease.
And the plan is, that's coming still. So, yeah, Steve. Great question. Will the royalties go up or will they stay? Or will they stay the way they are?
It's my understanding that it's a flat monthly fee lease for the space to have the tower here, the right to have the tower on our property.
They could go up if another
Yes,
locations within.
that's right. There's a possibility of another, someone else, pick one, wants to add their equipment in there. That would go up on that basis, but our deal with Verizon would not go up.
We need to start paying T-Mobile and AT&T.
Yeah.
Just call them weekly. Yep.
Particularly those of you that have AT&T, if you've ever tried to make a call in here, you should for sure be lobbying that AT&T. Show some love, AT&T. Jeez Louise. All right. What other questions? Okay. We're not doing this again probably till like February, March, y'all. So if you got an itch. Yeah, there we go, Steve. What do you got? Yeah, that's a great question. When will the cafe start? When will the cafe start? When will we start that construction? So I don't know is the best answer that I can give you. We're finishing the construction loan. Once that's done, then all the plans are drawn. The company that will be doing the building, like all of that's set to go. We just we don't know that deadline officially. So you can expect that to be coming. At the latest, we're talking in the spring. We're just in the paperwork right now. So, yeah. What are we borrowing for that? That's a great question. Do you want me to answer that? You guys can answer that? The initial work that we had done, getting the estimate from the folks who would be building that out, was about $300,000. And then it's actually, I think it was a little bit less, but we were buffering for a little bit more. And then on top of that, as a part of the runway campaign, we had set aside $360,000 for that whole project. So we do have another $60,000 that was a part of runway that is kind of a cash on hand for different things that we'll be needing to do around that project that won't be wrapped into the mortgage. Yeah, Luis.
We talked about weekly giving and kind of where the list and then right, and then if for any reason, that was what they talked about, becoming the church that we can be with what is available, potentially make some adjustments.
Yeah.
Do you have an idea of what those adjustments could look like, what it would be?
Yeah, for sure. So looking at the, guys, I'm doing so good this time. Man, growth. With the current giving that we have month to month being lower than what our budget needs to be, if we don't end up closing that gap, what are the repercussions? What do we do next? Do you want to answer that one? I can answer that one.
Well, if we don't reach that and we've spent the runway money and gone through that time period, then we tighten our belts further. We just say we're a smaller church than $34,618 a month budget. We had to cut that budget back to meet what the real income is. That's the bottom line. We would still, we'd have to factor in long-term potential royalty payments at some point. Right now, we're not factoring those in. We're saying baseline giving needs to support the baseline budget. That's been our approach.
And I can jump on top of that as being on staff here. We went through as staff members in charge of each of the different departments that we spend money in, and we went through line by line what we thought we needed for all the different geocodes and the ways that we spend money. So even the budget that we presented to the elders was already filtered through kind of a three-tiered process. If we were dreaming how much money would we need to do ministry well, if like maybe a normal number, we didn't really define that middle one, but then what if things were tough? And really this number that we've put together is kind of our bare bones to run our ministries well as best we can manage and deal with the money we've been given. So to your point, it would be sure, like there are funds that we set aside to do things, but those are what kind of drive ministry and what goes on here. And so there's what we're doing with how we're spending money, but there's also our employees and how many we have and what departments we can do. So it really just depends on how much we can do. The money that comes in, we do things with it. We do church. We do God's work in this building and outside. So it's looking at that and going, okay, with the money that we have, what can we do with it?
Yeah, and I think the last thing I would add on that I think just ties all that together, the budget, so our new budget season started October 1st, so we're now effectively working with this new budget that was built off of like, what are our most trim numbers that we can still be doing it, but we're like pretty thin. So when it comes to being able to tighten the belt, I think, Luis, to speak very directly to your question, we're kind of back to the same conversation we were at the beginning of the runway campaign of the biggest chunk of our budget that's very adjustable, that's kind of one of the last places we're going to be able to turn is looking at staffing. I think I want to infuse that with a little bit, like I want to normalize that a little bit, that this is how like the business of the church, this is pretty typical and it's a double-edged sword. So don't like, I want to say don't worry, but there's also a sense too of like, that's just the next budget. Like in years to come, we're going to have a monthly income of $50,000 and then $75,000, and that will be more staff. And so I hope that hearing those numbers and seeing losing staff as a potential outcome also comes with the reality of like, a local church will reflect what it is. And so if we can't afford to have that many staff, we'll have less staff. If we can afford to have more staff, we're going to have more staff running around here. And why and how, like that will all reflect the vision. But I think I do just want to answer directly and say, that's just a workplace hazard that we have in the line of business that we're in. And I don't think that that should bother us too much. I think that's just a reality that can cut either way. So.
I'd like to clarify one other thing I said. We have chosen not to bake mineral royalties into our budget planning because if you right now oil prices are high 80s, high $80 a barrel. A year ago, at some point, they were down to like 30. In fact, at one point, they were net zero if you were futures trading. So we cannot bet on the oil, on the royalties from minerals, and we can't bake that into our budget. So that's why we've used it to build reserves, to use it in other ways, but not plan to live off of that money. It'd be great if it continues. That's wonderful, and that helps us, but we can't plan it that way.
It's like the one place in life where you root for gas to keep getting more expensive. Think of it that way. Yes?
When is the next touch point with Habitat, and will that be a decision point or not yet?
Yeah, when's the next touch point with Habitat, and will that be a decision point? Decision point being, we got the money, we're starting to build. Is that what you're asking? Yeah, I mean, Sarah, we're kind of in like the week-to-week conversation mode with them right now. So we didn't finish that meeting this last week and be like, okay, we'll talk again in 3 months. It's kind of like our people will be calling your people kind of every week or every other. I mean, so we're tight. I mean, we're getting down the line. We are waiting. I mean, I want to be thoughtful about how much I share, but with this funding stream that Habitat will be applying for and that some of the other partnerships that we're working around will be applying for, that's really the next big floodgate that we're waiting on, is for that application to finish, to be sent in, hopefully then for money to be granted, and then like, again, it's kind of similar to Cafe. All the plans are drawn up, like we just need the money to then hit the go button and we start building. So it's tight. Time frame on... Yeah, that I won't answer just because that's not our job. That somebody else is doing that work, so I don't want to answer and be beholden to somebody else because I think they're great and they're really hard workers, but because we're not owning that, I can't answer that one. So, any other questions? Yes. Yeah. That's a great question. Yeah, so looking at attendance numbers, is there a way to track? Yeah, is there a way to track who's coming to what? Do we know who these people are? That's such a good question. I love that question. Jen Webster, who's on staff with us, A, is amazing. B, one of her projects for the last little while, and it's incorporated into her job, but is doing a lot of that tracking. So Planning Center is the system that we use. It's all run through the Church Center app. All of that kind of is one big system. But the numbers that you saw on the screen are numbers of Jake or one of our staff doing a head count on Sundays and then taking rough sums of how many views are we getting online and how do we count those. And that's like really weird math that we need smarter people to do. But I think I would say two answers to your question. One, who's here on a Sunday morning in the auditorium? Short of having like a check-in system where it'll be like, check in your kid and now check in yourself and now put a sticker on your own shirt. Like we won't have a way to track those individuals. And I think I would say that actually doesn't matter as much to me. I think folks who are here on Sunday morning, that's fantastic. I don't want to say that they don't matter, but the numbers that do matter a lot to us is who is getting involved in a life group. Like where are the places where people are plugging in and participating in ministry? So we do track those numbers. Life group leaders right now, there's ways for them to check in every single week. Here's our whole life group list. I can go through and click these people were here this week, and we do know that. And so that's some deep level work that Jen is in the weeds with all the time and just curating for us better and better all the time of how do we track those numbers. So I don't know if that satisfies your question, but that's what's happening right now. Do you want to ask a follow-up to that? No. I just didn't know if that was getting at what you were wanting to ask. Yes. Oh, man. I like your questions. Okay. Yes, thank you. When somebody's new, does anybody know? So there's two answers to that. Either the answer is no, because they haven't told anyone yet. Oftentimes, we work pretty hard as a staff to have folks that are out in the lobby. Our elders do a great job of this. Oftentimes, they intentionally sit in different places in the room where they can meet new people. But our best step in that is to help somebody see, whether it's through announcements, whether it's through the person that you just met when you came into the room, or maybe it's going to be a few Sundays in because people are intentionally a bit cagey when they're checking out a church for the first time. But at some point, the first day that they go in and sign in to Church Center and build their profile, Jen will get a ping right away saying, hey, we have a new person. This is who they are. And then that sets up a whole workflow of different things that happen around that person. Brendan Reed, who's on staff with us, will reach out and say, hey, welcome to our church. Let us know if you have any questions, any things you want to know more about. Here's what our next starting point class is going to be. All of those things get put in motion. So there's that. Yeah, yes.
This isn't getting on the finance piece, but the Church Center app, does it have an option to say when you create a profile and have a checkbox, yes, this would be in a public church directory, and have some kind of directory where we can find somebody that we can contact them that we met.
Cool.
Can you talk about having a directory at all?
Let me repeat the question. Do you know the answer to that question?
Possibly.
Okay, great. The question is, in Church Center, when people are building their profile, is there a checkbox that says you can publish my information in a church-wide directory? Is that something that we have, and can we utilize that?
Yeah, and I'm not going to be the right person to answer this, but we do have people that work with Planning Center, Jen Webster being one of them, but then others on staff that know the ins and outs of how that works. But there is, I know, one hoop of just sharing public information. Like people aren't always on the same page of wanting their information to be shared in that way. So I know that there are things like within your life group or within groups you're part of where you can share your information that way, but sharing it at a large, entire church level, those are some of the obstacles. That's not to say there isn't such a checkbox and we couldn't enable it, but those are the thought process behind it. So I think it's just, thanks for the question, and we'll definitely put that in the hopper and see if there's a way we can effectively use that.
Staff who are in the room, does anybody know a better answer to that? Okay. Sarah, we'll work on that. That's a great thought. Oh, yeah, Tom.
Historically, we chose not to go down that path of the church directory for lots of reasons. For privacy, one, and then the logistics of managing are pretty massive. Like keeping current, that sort of thing. It's not as simple as just doing it. So Planning Center is potentially a way that could be done and maybe simpler than we think, but we just never want to spend resources and go through the steps of establishing privacy policies and all of that that we need to be in place for that. This isn't a nice.
Cool. Thanks, Tom. Yeah. Okay. So if you're watching the recording of this, all this conversation that just happened, some of that answer is continuing to fall back on the privacy, just some of the privacy issues we have to navigate in the world of the 21st century. Yeah.
Thanks for that.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yes. Yeah.
So, you like you mentioned earlier, we're looking for a new worship partner, being proactive about it. Are we proactively looking at ways that we can take advantage of this land that we're seeing?
Yes. Oh, Steve. You guys, this is so fun. Oh, that's a great question.
Did you plant some of these?
I
Did you plant some of these
I wish I was
questions?
that
'Cause
smart.
You wanted that question asked.
The question is, generally, as a church, we're cash poor, land rich. What are we doing to leverage the land that we have to provide more income? Oh man, great question. So I want you to hear right out of the gate. We need ideas on this. It is really easy to be at a church and to offer ideas like lobbing grenades at somebody else. So I want you to hear in this. There is an invitation if this is something that interests you. Also, there is an opportunity that's opening itself up to you that you could become trouble for people who are trying to do good. So, as a totally ominous proviso, now let me answer your question, Steve. Gail Fleisch, who is awesome, came up to me it was probably about 6 months ago, our first conversation, and that was his question. What are we doing? In my handoff from both Steve and from Tom, that was one of the initial, keep this in front of the elder board and of yourself of what are we doing with the land? So Gail, we're in the process right now of forming a task force that will essentially be their thing, is they're going to go be bloodhounds who are just getting on the trail of what are the different ways that we can be generating income off this property. That team will be bringing those ideas as they have them back to the elder board to submit them to say, here's some options. And that team knows they're going to have to leave things pretty loose. Like if we get too attached to an idea and then if the elders should turn it down, that's kind of that team's job is not to have their feelings hurt. It's just like, we're just going out looking for jobs. And then we're trusting how the Bible set up this idea of a team of elders that help lead the church. Like if they say yes, yes. If it's no, no. And then we're just going to go back out and keep looking for more. But yes, those conversations are happening. If that's something, like I said, that really interests you, I would invite you to be a part of the task force. If that interests you and you just want to tell other people your ideas and then tell them to go make your ideas a reality, you should be on the task force. But if you don't want to be involved, just think through, am I offering an idea and then telling somebody else to go do it, or would I really be willing to put a shoulder in? I think hopefully you're hearing my heart and the tenor of that response there. So here you go, Steve. Anything else for this time? Okay. If you want to stick around for a little bit afterwards, you can pull any of the three of us aside. We'd love to just make sure that you have total clarity. Thanks again for those that are here. Thanks for those who will watch this in the days to come. And for sure, if you're watching this video on purpose, or if you're here on purpose, maybe you got suckered in, but you value this church a lot. You want to know how things are working and how decisions are being made. And whether you agree with them or not, I want to honor you and just say thank you for investing in the local church, like how you're doing it. I'm so grateful for you. Let me close this with a word of prayer, and then we can be done. Jesus, I'm grateful for folks like Barrett Gable and people who have been a part of this community for a long time, folks who have seen this place at its best financially, at its worst financially. I think as we look back, it gives us so much faith and strength as we look forward. And we don't know if it's going to be nice and pretty, but I'm just so excited to be a part of this church because I see the story that you're continuing to tell out of this place, and it is good. I pray for myself and for our staff and for our elders and for every single person that calls this church home, that as we dream about what's to come, you would continue to invigorate our faith, that we would be people who live with a bright expectation. Keep our eyes always towards bigger and better things, the ways that we can do ministry, the ways that we can care for the poor and the outcast, the ways where we can disciple and grow richly in our pursuit of you. Thanks for all the things that you've given us, from mineral rights to an incredibly talented staff, to folks who love not just this church and the building and the people inside of it, but who radically love those outside to the ends of the earth. It's in your name we pray. Amen. All right. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll see you later.